It started in a courtroom, the kind where truth is buried under polished lies and expensive suits. The air was heavy, the tension alive. All eyes turned toward the witness stand, where a German shepherd sat in silence. Her name was Little Girl, a police K-9 once trained by a man who never came home. On this day, she wasn't chasing criminals or sniffing for bombs. She was staring down a man in a silk tie, a lawyer too confident for his own good. And as he smiled, mocking her presence, something extraordinary happened. A child sitting in the second row sneezed, just once, softly. But that single sneeze changed everything, because in that moment, the dog froze, growled low, and the courtroom held its breath. What followed was not a trial about evidence, but about instinct, loyalty, and a love that refused to die. No one knew it yet, but that sneeze would expose a lie that had been hidden for months, and the one who found the truth didn't have a voice at all. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and nerves. Old wooden benches creaked under the restless shifting of reporters, officers, and civilians, who had come not for a verdict, but for a spectacle. They called it the case with the dog. Cameras weren't allowed, but curiosity was. It buzzed through the room like static before a storm. At the front sat Daniel Briggs, sleeves rolled to his forearms, papers neat but untouched. He didn't need them. His eyes stayed fixed on the German shepherd sitting beside the witness stand, posture proud, chest rising steady, eyes alert. Her name was Little Girl, the last surviving K-9 from a squad that once worked under his late friend, Officer Miles. She looked almost human, watchful, loyal, as if she understood what was at stake. Across the aisle, Mr. Kane, the defense lawyer, adjusted his cufflinks and smiled the kind of smile that wasn't meant for people. It was meant for victory. He was a master of tone, every word measured, every gesture designed to cast doubt like a shadow. His client, a slick-faced man accused of tampering with police evidence, sat hunched and sweating behind him. The hum of whispers stopped when the judge entered. The bailiff called for silence. Daniel rose, as did Kane, one out of respect, the other out of performance. The judge's gavel echoed once. "Mr. Kane?" she said, raising a skeptical brow. "You've requested an unusual cross-examination. You wish to approach the K-9 witness?" Kane's grin widened slightly. "With the court's permission, Your Honor. Only to demonstrate that this witness," he gestured toward Little Girl, "is merely responding to handler cues, not truth or deceit. A simple behavioral test." A murmur swept the gallery. A lawyer cross-examining a dog? Teeth. Absurdity wasn't lost on anyone, but neither was the tension. Daniel said nothing, though his jaw tightened. The judge sighed. "Proceed carefully, Mr. Kane. The animal is trained and under handler supervision." Kane turned toward the dog like a magician preparing his finale. He adjusted his glasses, flashed a charming smile, and began his slow walk toward her, each step echoing on the polished floor. The room fell still. You could hear the hum of the lights. In the second row, Sophie, small and solemn in her dark dress, watched with both fear and defiance. Her hands gripped the edge of her seat, knuckles white. She wasn't supposed to be here, but the court had made an exception. After all, she was Little Girl's handler now, the daughter of the man who'd trained her. Daniel caught Sophie's gaze, a silent reassurance. She'll be fine. But inside his stomach twisted. He didn't like this at all. Kane stopped just short of the dog. "Beautiful creature," he said softly, like a man greeting a stranger's pet at a cocktail party. "I hear she's quite the detective." No response, just steady, unblinking eyes. "She helped identify my client's scent at the scene, didn't she?" He continued, pacing in a half-circle. "And yet, how curious. Animals can be mistaken. They can be guided." He looked toward the jury, then back to the shepherd. "Let's see if loyalty outweighs logic, shall we?" Daniel shifted in his chair. He wanted to object, to tell the man to stop performing. But something in him held back. The story unfolding here wasn't just legal. It was human. Or more than human. Kane crouched down, his cologne mixing with the faint scent of disinfectant. He reached a hand forward, slow, deliberate, his expression a portrait of false calm. The dog's ears twitched, her gaze narrowed. A bead of sweat rolled down Daniel's face. He had seen that look before, right before a K9 lunged at a suspect who reeked of fear and guilt. Kane tilted his head slightly. "See?" he said to the jury. "She recognizes authority, obedience. That's all this is." Then he smiled, the wrong kind of smile, the kind that exposes teeth. The shepherd's low growl rippled through the silence, soft but unmistakable. Kane froze. The audience leaned forward. Sophie's lips parted. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the whole courtroom could hear it. Daniel stood halfway, ready to call it off, but then stopped when he noticed Sophie's expression change. She wasn't afraid. She was waiting. The air was tight as a violin string. Kane tried to recover, chuckling. Now, don't be shy." He reached forward again, voice dripping with confidence. "See? Nothing to—" And that's when it happened. A loud, sudden sneeze, sharp, high-pitched, from the second row. Sophie's sneeze. The sound sliced through the tension like a blade. Heads turned. The jury startled. Even the judge blinked. Little girl stopped growling. Her head tilted slightly, eyes flicking toward Sophie, then back at the lawyer. Her muscles tensed, body coiled like a spring. The growl returned, lower this time, deep, primal. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Kane frowned, uncertain. "I suppose even the audience feels nervous," he said lightly. But Daniel wasn't laughing. He wasn't even breathing. His eyes darted from Sophie to the dog, then back again. Something just shifted. Something subtle, but undeniable. Sophie's sneeze wasn't random. Daniel could see it in her face. Too deliberate, too sharp, like a note in a secret melody. Kane withdrew his hand slowly, standing upright. "Your Honor," he said, voice trembling just slightly, "I believe my point is made." He dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief that smelled faintly of cologne. Little girl followed his movement, unblinking. The judge cleared her throat. "Mr. Kane, that's enough. Return to your seat." "Yes, Your Honor," he muttered, but his confidence had a crack now. Thin, but visible. The courtroom exhaled as if it had been holding its breath for hours. A few nervous laughs rippled through the gallery. The bailiff stepped closer to the stand, just in case. Sophie sat very still, eyes on the shepherd, tears threatening to fall. Little girl's gaze softened, not in words, but in something older, deeper. Daniel finally sat back down, pen unmoved in his hand. His mind replayed the sneeze, the timing, the reaction, the look. He couldn't prove it yet, but he knew there was meaning there. He leaned toward Sophie and whispered, barely audible, "Good girl." Whether he meant the dog or the child, even he wasn't sure. The scene ended in stillness. Mr. Kane stood frozen near his desk, pretending to review his notes. The judge rubbed her temples, weary of the circus this case had become. And little girl, calm now, steady, lowered her head onto her paws, her amber eyes never leaving the man who had dared to touch her. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. The kind of silence that knows the truth has only just begun to stir. The courtroom was still humming from the tension of what had just happened. Mr. Kane's hand hovered in midair, caught somewhere between arrogance and unease. The German shepherd sat motionless, every muscle coiled, golden eyes fixed on him. For a moment, it looked like the world itself had stopped breathing. Then, in a voice smooth as silk but slightly forced, Kane tried to recover. "See, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his grin stretched thin. "Even dogs can pick up on energy. She's simply reacting to my confidence." The jury laughed softly, nervous, polite. But Daniel Briggs didn't laugh. His gaze flicked from the lawyer to the girl in the second row, that small figure in the black cardigan with her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. Sophie sat upright, eyes wide, lips pressed together. And then she did it again. A sharp, unmistakable sneeze. It broke through the room like a lightning crack. Some jurors chuckled. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Bless you," someone whispered from the back. But Daniel felt a shiver slide down his spine. The timing was too perfect. He had seen enough interrogations to know coincidence rarely struck twice. The dog reacted instantly. Little girl's head turned toward Sophie, then back at the lawyer, her hackles barely raised, a faint rumble vibrating from her chest. Her nose twitched, nostrils flaring, as if catching a scent that wasn't there a moment ago. Daniel leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Something was happening beneath the surface, something coded, deliberate. Kane, flustered now, adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, perhaps we can move on from this circus act." The judge gestured for him to proceed, unimpressed. But Daniel's attention was elsewhere. Sophie had lowered her gaze as if hiding something. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, too tightly for a child pretending to be at ease. And then it clicked. Timed shatters 600 samos. A memory. Distant, faint, but clear. A year ago in the precinct yard he had seen Sophie's father, Officer Miles, training his K-9. Daniel had passed by, curious. The man was teaching the girl how to communicate without words. "No voice, Sophie," Miles had said, gentle but firm. "Sometimes you can't speak. Sometimes it's too dangerous. But dogs, they read the smallest things. A breath, a blink, a sound." He tapped his nose. "A sneeze, for example. It can mean stop or danger. Depends on what you teach her." At the time, Daniel had chuckled, half thinking it was just a father entertaining his daughter. Now, that memory pressed hard against his ribs like a secret finally resurfacing. Back in the courtroom, little girl's stare had become sharper. She wasn't just reacting. She was listening. Waiting. Daniel's pulse quickened. He watched Kane circle the stand, still trying to act amused. "Poor thing," the lawyer said mockingly, "probably confused by all the smells in this room. Don't worry, sweetheart. No one here means you harm." He crouched again, voice dropping into that silky register meant to disarm. His hand reached out, too casual, too confident. The same cologne that Sophie's father once wore before heading out on his last mission clung faintly to the air. Sophie's chest rose sharply. Her eyes flashed to the dog, and she sneezed again. It was louder this time, sharper. It echoed against the high ceiling like a signal flare. Little girl reacted in a blink. Her head snapped up, ears erect. The growl deepened, low and guttural, as if awakening from restraint. Mr. Kane stumbled backward. What is wrong with this animal?" The judge lifted a hand. "Handler, control your dog." But Sophie whispered under her breath, so quietly that only Daniel caught it. "She's doing her job." Daniel's stomach dropped. It wasn't rebellion in her voice. It was certainty. That same calm confidence her father had carried. Little girl rose halfway, eyes locked on the lawyer. Her body language said everything words could not. Threat detected. The courtroom was chaos and stillness. No one dared move. Kane tried to laugh it off, but his throat betrayed him with a crack. He looked to the jury, forcing a grin. "Perhaps she just doesn't like my aftershave." But Daniel saw it. The tiniest flicker of something else in the man's eyes. Fear. Fear of recognition. He glanced at Sophie. She wasn't smiling, but her face had softened, as though she knew her signal had been received. Daniel turned back to the dog. He saw the same recognition mirrored there, the same invisible pulse of trust flowing between the girl and her father's old partner. It was like watching two souls communicate in silence, one bound by love, the other by memory. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "You're not just guessing, are you?" In that instant, it all made sense. The sneeze, the tension, the precision of it. He wasn't watching an accident. He was watching a code. And if that was true, then Sophie and little girl weren't just witnesses. They were partners in uncovering something hidden, something the lawyer desperately wanted buried. Kane, rattled but trying to regain composure, stepped back to the podium. "Your Honor, if we're done entertaining fairy tales, I request we dismiss the animal's contribution as—" He stopped. Little girl's eyes were still on him. Steady, knowing. The kind of stare that pierces deeper than words, straight into conscience. Kane swallowed hard, his argument faltering. The room was too quiet now. Every ear tuned to that unspoken tension between predator and prey. Daniel leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen once. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Something far greater was happening than any objection could capture. He turned slowly towards Sophie, the girl who sat so still, yet carried her father's fire. Her eyes met his. There, in that brief exchange, Daniel realized she wasn't afraid of the courtroom, the lawyer, or the outcome. What frightened her most was the idea of no one listening to the truth her dog was trying to tell. And Daniel, for the first time in a long while, decided to listen. The judge cleared her throat, breaking the trance. "Mr. Kane, please continue." "Yes, Your Honor," he said, though his voice lacked conviction now. He fumbled with his notes, pretending to regain control, but the control was gone. The courtroom had changed. The people might not have understood why, but something sacred had just been felt, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Daniel's gaze lingered on the pair, the girl and the dog. He saw it now, clearly, an invisible thread connecting them. One sneeze had carried more truth than any testimony that morning. He whispered, almost reverently, "Your father would be proud." The lights overhead flickered slightly. The air felt heavy, waiting for something. The next chapter of truth, he could feel it, was only a breath away. The park smelled of pine and spring rain, the kind of evening that carried the sound of laughter farther than it should. A low sun bathed the grass in gold, and in the open field near the old oak, Officer Miles knelt beside a young German shepherd with alert amber eyes and a restless tail. "All right, little girl," he said, holding up his hand in command. "Sit." The dog froze, dropped to her haunches, tail sweeping the dirt, once, twice. Then she looked up, tongue out, waiting for the next order. "Stay," he murmured. He took 3 steps back, then 4. The wind tugged at his uniform, the scent of his gloves mixing with grass and dog fur. A pause. Then, "Come." She leaped forward like a burst of joy. He laughed, catching her mid-jump, ruffling her fur. "Good girl," he whispered, the words soft and reverent, as if thanking something greater than training itself. From the edge of the field, Sophie, 12 years old and bright-eyed, clapped her hands. Her laugh rang out, pure, unguarded. "She's faster than last week, Daddy." Miles grinned. "Because you've been sneaking her snacks, haven't you?" Sophie pressed her lips together, trying not to smile. "Only sometimes." He chuckled, sitting on the grass beside her. Little girl curled up between them, pressing her head against Sophie's knee. The world around them seemed to pause. The hum of cicadas, the distant bark of another dog, the sky sliding slowly toward dusk. Miles watched his daughter stroke the dog's head, her small fingers tracing patterns along the fur. "You know," he said quietly, "there's one thing I've learned in this job." Sophie looked up at him, curious. "Dogs don't lie, sweetheart. Remember that when people do." She tilted her head. "People lie a lot?" He sighed. "The kind that comes from too many years on the street. Too many confessions wrapped in false tears. More than they should. Sometimes for money, sometimes out of fear. But dogs, they just are. Honest, even when it hurts." Sophie nodded solemnly, her eyes reflecting more understanding than her age allowed. "So that's why you trust her more than your partners?" Miles smiled faintly. "Sometimes, yeah. She never lets me walk into something blind." Little girl wagged her tail, as if confirming it. The light dimmed, clouds stretching thin and red across the horizon. Miles stood, dusting off his pants. "All right, one more time before we go home." He raised his hand again. "Search!" The dog darted forward, nose to the ground, weaving between shadows. Sophie watched in awe. To her, it wasn't training. It was magic. The way little girl moved like she could read invisible trails in the air. The way her father's voice softened when he spoke to her, as though she were another child under his care. A few minutes later, the shepherd returned with a glove in her mouth, one of Miles's spares. She sat proudly, tail thumping, eyes bright with triumph. "See that?" Miles said, crouching to take the glove. "She finds what's lost, always." Sophie smiled, not knowing those words would echo in her memory for the rest of her life. Night crept in like a slow tide. The park emptied, leaving behind the rustle of leaves and the glow of distant streetlights. At home, warm light from the kitchen spilled across the floor where little girl dozed near the table. Sophie sat drawing, a stick figure of her dad and the dog, while Miles cleaned his gear. He looked at the clock. 9:12. The call would come soon. It always did. Sophie yawned, rubbing her eyes. "You'll be home for breakfast, right?" He smiled, but didn't answer right away. "That's the plan." Little girl lifted her head, watching him with those knowing eyes. She always seemed to sense the nights that carried danger. Miles knelt, resting a hand on her fur. "You take care of my girl, okay?" The shepherd leaned into his touch, a low whine in her throat. Sophie frowned. "Why does she always do that when you leave?" He hesitated. "Because she's smarter than we are." The radio on the counter crackled, the sound of dispatch calling. His shoulders squared. "Duty," he said softly. He grabbed his jacket, kissed Sophie's forehead. "Lock the doors. I'll see you soon." She clung to him a moment longer than usual. "Promise?" He smiled, the kind meant to hide fear. "Promise." He opened the door, the night breeze cool against his face. Little girl padded to the doorway, blocking it with her body. Her tail was still, her eyes pleading. Miles bent down, brushing a thumb over her ear. "Hey, it's just another call. I'll be back before you miss me." But the dog didn't move. She pressed her head against his knee. Sophie's throat tightened. Finally, Miles gave a short command. "Home." Little girl stepped back, reluctantly, her body trembling. The door closed. The clock ticked past midnight. The house was too quiet. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Little girl lay beside the door, eyes open, ears flicking at every sound. Outside, sirens wailed far away, distant but sharp enough to wake the girl. She sat up, blinking, heart racing. The dog stood, suddenly, pacing, whining softly. Something in the air felt wrong. Hours passed. The sirens faded. No headlights appeared in the driveway. When the first light of dawn touched the curtains, the phone rang. Sophie's mother answered, and the color drained from her face. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The sound of the receiver hitting the table said everything. Sophie didn't understand at first. She only knew her mother collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Little girl whined and pressed her head against the woman's lap, confused, desperate. Then Sophie looked at the empty doorway, the leash hanging by the hook, the untouched coffee mug on the counter. And she knew. Her father wasn't coming home. That night, the house turned to silence again, the heavy kind that follows heartbreak. Sophie sat by the door with little girl beside her. Every creak of the porch made the dog lift her head, ears straining, waiting for footsteps that never came. Sophie whispered, voice trembling, "He said he'd come back." The dog whimpered softly, curling closer, her body warm against Sophie's shaking hands. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of howling, long, low, and mournful. But it wasn't the wind. It was little girl, her voice breaking into the night, calling for the man who would never answer. And as the sound faded, Sophie pressed her face into her fur and wept, not just for her father, but for the loyalty that would never let go. The funeral was quiet, too quiet for a man who had once filled every room with laughter. The flag on Officer Miles's coffin fluttered in the mild wind, and somewhere far away, a lone dog barked, as if calling for someone who had lost their way home. Sophie stood near the front, black dress wrinkled in her small fists. Her eyes were dry, tight, but not because she wasn't crying. She'd run out of tears hours ago, 12 years old, and already learning what silence meant in a world that had taken her father. Beside her sat little girl, the German shepherd that refused to leave the casket's side. Her leash lay slack in Sophie's hands, but it wasn't needed. The dog didn't move, didn't blink, just watched the flag as though waiting for it to rise again. Her tail lay still, her chest rising in quiet rhythm, the way soldiers stand guard long after the battle is done. Mourners came and went. The other officers patted Sophie's shoulder, muttering the same sentences that had already lost meaning. He was a hero. He saved lives. He'd be proud of you. Sophie nodded because she was supposed to, but inside the words felt hollow. Proud? How could he be proud when he wasn't here to see her anymore? When the ceremony ended, people began to leave. Only the three of them remained: Sophie, little girl, and the flag that fluttered over the coffin. Sophie crouched beside the dog, resting her hand on that familiar fur. "They said they're going to take you away," she whispered. "They said you'll work with someone new." Little girl let out a soft whine, pressing her nose into Sophie's palm. Her eyes were wet, and if grief had a shape, it would look like that. Silent, faithful, and impossible to comfort. Later that afternoon, the police yard was filled with chatter. Officers loaded gear, paperwork shuffled, radios buzzed. But Sophie didn't hear any of it. She stood in front of the kennel, refusing to move. Two men in uniform stood nearby. "Orders are clear," one said. "The K-9's being reassigned. She's too valuable to retire." "She's all I have left," Sophie pleaded. "You can't just take her." The man looked uncomfortable, glancing at his partner. "I'm sorry, kid. I don't make the rules." As they tried to lead little girl toward the truck, the dog planted her paws firmly in the ground, pulling against the leash with surprising strength. Her growl was low, protective, a sound that said no one touches her girl. The officers tugged harder, but the shepherd refused to move. Sophie's heart cracked a little more with every pull. "Please!" Sophie shouted, running forward, wrapping her arms around little girl's neck. "She's mine! She's Daddy's! You can't take her away!" The men froze, partly out of pity, partly because of the sight before them. The little girl holding the dog like she was clinging to a memory itself. Then a new voice cut through the noise. "That's enough." Detective Daniel Briggs stepped out from behind a parked cruiser, his badge glinting in the sunlight. He was younger then, late 20s, tired eyes that had seen too much too soon. He looked at Sophie, then at the shepherd, and something in him softened. "What's going on here?" he asked quietly. "Reassignment order," one of the officers said. "Dog's scheduled for a new handler by tomorrow." Briggs looked at the dog, then back at Sophie. The way little girl pressed herself protectively against the girl's legs. That wasn't protocol. That was bond. And he knew enough about loss to recognize what it looked like. "Not today," Briggs said finally. "Not this one. But sir," he lifted a hand, "I'll take responsibility. She stays with the Yasson family until the case closes." The officers hesitated, but Briggs's tone left no room for argument. They exchanged looks, muttered under their breath, and left. Sophie wiped her eyes, unsure whether to trust this man. Briggs crouched down, voice low, gentle. "He was my friend," he said. "Your dad. We worked cases together. He talked about you all the time. She sniffled. He promised me he'd come back. Briggs nodded slowly. I know. He looked at little girl, still trembling from the struggle. She's got his spirit, you know. She feels what you feel. Maybe that's why she won't leave. Sophie stroked the dog's fur. They said she has to work. She already is, Briggs said softly. She's working for you now. For the first time since the funeral, Sophie smiled. Small, fragile, but real. Can I keep her? Briggs hesitated, then sighed. I'll make sure she always has a home. That's a promise. That night, the two of them sat in the small living room. The house felt emptier than before, the walls echoing with absence. The framed photo of her father in uniform sat on the mantel, his smile caught forever in a moment of pride. Sophie turned to little girl, who lay at her feet, head resting on her paws. It's just us now, she whispered. The dog blinked once, slow and steady, as if saying, I know. Sophie tilted her head thoughtfully. Daddy used to say we should have a code, remember? Like spies. The dog's ears perked up. Sophie giggled softly, though her eyes were still swollen from crying. Okay. How about this? When I sneeze, it means something's wrong. Danger. Or someone's lying. Little girl tilted her head, studying her. Sophie tried again. Sneeze equals danger. Blink once for yes, twice for no. She sneezed softly, pretending, and the shepherd immediately lifted her, head alert. Sophie smiled, a flicker of hope warming her chest. See? You get it. You're smarter than everyone thinks. The room was quiet again, but not empty anymore. Something sacred was being rebuilt in that silence, thread by thread. Trust, love, and the invisible bridge between grief and healing. Sophie lay down beside her, whispering into the dark. They think you're just a dog, but you and me, we know better, don't we? Little girl's breathing slowed, matching hers. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, carrying the faint echo of the park, where laughter once lived. Sophie looked toward her father's photograph. We'll find the truth together, she said softly. You, me, and Daddy's promise. The dog blinked once, slow, deliberate. In the quiet that followed, two hearts beat in sync, bound not by blood, but by something deeper. And from that night on, the world would never again doubt the power of what a child and a dog could keep alive, even when everyone else had given up. The courtroom felt colder that morning. Not the kind of cold that came from air conditioning. This was something else. The kind of chill that settled into the bones when truth and deceit shared the same room. The case had stretched for weeks. Testimonies blurred together. Faces came and went. But today all eyes were fixed once more on little girl, the German shepherd who had become both a symbol of loyalty and the object of ridicule. Mr. Kane, the defense lawyer, stood at the podium, his voice smooth and mocking as always. He paced slowly, the faint click of his polished shoes echoing through the silence. So let me understand this, he said, gesturing toward the witness stand, where the dog sat beside her handler. We're convicting a man based on what a dog thinks she smelled. Laughter rippled faintly through the gallery, hesitant, uneasy. Kane smiled. With all due respect, Your Honor, this feels less like a court of law and more like a circus act. Perhaps next time the prosecution will call in a fortune teller. He turned, eyes glinting toward Daniel Briggs, who sat unflinching at the prosecution's table. Daniel's jaw flexed once, but he said nothing. He'd learned long ago that silence could sting louder than rebuttal. The judge sighed. "Mr. Kane, please keep your remarks relevant to the case." "Of course, Your Honor," Kane said smoothly, pretending humility. "I merely wish to demonstrate that this so-called evidence, a scent identification by an animal, is unreliable. Dogs can be manipulated, distracted, even deceived." He stepped closer to the stand, tone dripping with derision. "After all, they act for treats, not for truth." A low murmur filled the courtroom. Daniel's knuckles whitened around his pen. Sophie, sitting quietly behind the railing, felt her pulse quicken. She could feel little girl's unease too, the way her tail stiffened, the small twitch in her ear. Sophie knew that body language. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Kane smirked, sensing the tension. "If the court permits, I'd like to perform a small demonstration to prove my point." Daniel's voice cut through the air, calm but razor-edged. "Objection. This isn't a stage." "Overruled," the judge said, weary. "But keep it brief, Mr. Kane." "With pleasure," Kane said. He turned back toward the shepherd, removing the thin black gloves he always wore. The gesture was casual, but deliberate. The faint sound of leather peeling from skin whispered across the courtroom. And then a scent drifted through the air, subtle but sharp, almost metallic beneath the layer of expensive cologne. Sophie froze. Her breath caught before she could even understand why. Her mind flashed. A night she could never forget. The door opened. The smell of metal and rain on her father's uniform. The faint trace of that same cologne clinging to his gear. One she'd noticed when she pressed her face against his vest the night before he left. Her fingers gripped the edge of the bench. That smell. It was him. Or rather, it had been with him. Kane crouched again, extending his bare hand toward little girl, voice soft and patronizing. "See? Nothing to fear, right, girl?" The dog's nose twitched. Once. Twice. Her pupils dilated. Then a low rumble began deep in her chest. Primal, controlled, unmistakable. The sound froze the room. "Easy, girl," the handler whispered. But Sophie could see it. The shift in her eyes, the flicker of memory. That wasn't fear. It was recognition. Kane glanced at the judge, pretending calm. "There, you see? She's reacting to me because I've removed her handler's scent cues. It's instinct, nothing more." But his hand trembled slightly as he lowered it again, feigning confidence. The growl deepened. The sound filled the room like a warning no one could misunderstand. A few jurors leaned back. The bailiff tensed. Even the judge reached for her gavel. Daniel rose slowly from his seat, voice quiet but charged. "Mr. Kane, maybe step back." Kane shot him a smirk. "Why? Afraid your star witness might bite the truth?" Daniel didn't blink. "Maybe she already has." A ripple went through the spectators. Kane chuckled, but his laughter was hollow now. He dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief, the same one he'd used days ago when he first approached the dog. Sophie saw it too late, the faint trace of something dark near the edge of the fabric. Not visible to most, but she saw it. A small stain, old but real. Her throat tightened. That scent, that mark, that connection. She whispered under her breath, barely audible, She knows him. Daniel turned subtly, catching the words. What did you say? Sophie didn't look away from the dog. Little girl knows that smell. The world around them seemed to fade. The rustle of papers, the scratching pens, the murmurs. All Sophie could see was the shepherd's steady stare and the man who stood before her, pretending to be in control. Little girl's body lowered slightly, muscles tightening. Daniel recognized it instantly. The same posture she took before striking on command during a field test. He knew because he'd seen Officer Miles demonstrate it once, laughing as his partner obeyed with flawless precision. Dogs don't lie, Miles had said back then. If she growls, pay attention. And now, in that same courtroom where justice was supposed to speak through human mouths, truth was rumbling through the throat of a dog. Kane stepped closer, tone still mocking. She's reacting to tension in the room. You see, animals feed off emotion. A sudden bark shattered the air. Sharp, powerful, undeniable. Kane jerked backward, losing his balance, his expression breaking into something raw. Fear. The gallery gasped. The bailiff reached forward, but Daniel's quiet voice stopped him. She's not attacking. She's warning. The judge struck her gavel, calling for order. But the damage was done. The mask of charm on Kane's face had cracked. He adjusted his tie with shaking hands, forcing composure. This proves my point. She's volatile. But Sophie could see the truth written all over him. The way his pupils had shrunk. The tremor in his jaw. Little girl's bark hadn't come from confusion. It had come from memory. From that scent that had lingered on her father's gear the night he died. And suddenly, everything felt heavier. The room, the air, the silence that followed. Kane tried to turn away, but little girl didn't break eye contact. Daniel sat back down, pen unmoved in his hand. His gaze stayed fixed on the lawyer, then drifted toward Sophie, pale, trembling. He didn't know what she knew yet, but he felt it in his gut. This wasn't just a coincidence. Something about that smell connected the man in front of him to the past, to a night that still haunted a little girl and her loyal dog. And somewhere deep inside, the truth began to stir, faint, fragile, but unstoppable. The courtroom had returned to a fragile kind of order, but no one truly relaxed. Even after the recess bell rang and the jurors were dismissed for lunch, the air still felt thick, like the echo of thunder that refuses to fade. Sophie sat quietly on the wooden bench, hands folded in her lap, eyes locked on the place where Mr. Kane had been standing moments ago. He was gone now, retreated to a corner with his client, whispering furiously. But his scent, that same smell, still hung faintly in the air. She could feel it. So could little girl. The German shepherd lay at her feet, head resting between her paws, eyes half closed but alert. Every so often, her nostrils flared, her ears flicked, a soldier waiting for a command that hadn't yet been given. Sophie's heart pounded harder with each breath. That smell, a blend of leather, faint cologne, and something metallic beneath it. She'd known it before. She'd smelled it long before today. But where? She closed her eyes, and the courtroom faded around her. The murmur of voices, the scrape of chairs, gone. All that remained was the sound of memory, months earlier. Rain pounded the roof of the police station. The hallway lights buzzed faintly, throwing shadows across the tile floor. Sophie wasn't supposed to be there that night. She'd slipped in through the back door after school, determined to see little girl, who had been kept in the K-9 holding area since her father's death. No one noticed the small figure moving past the file room, shoes squeaking softly against the floor. The air smelled like paper and dust, and something else. Something faint but sharp. She found the dog in her kennel, tail wagging weakly. Little girl's eyes brightened when she saw her, letting out a soft whimper that made Sophie's throat tighten. "Hey, girl," she whispered, pressing her face against the bars. "I missed you." Little girl licked her, fingers through the metal grate. It felt like home again, if only for a second. Sophie unlatched the door, the way she'd seen her dad do it 100 times, and slipped inside. The dog pressed against her, warmth radiating through the chill of the rain outside. "You want to go for a walk?" Sophie whispered. The answer came with a soft nudge of the shepherd's nose. They wandered down the empty hallway, Sophie holding the leash loosely. The hum of the building filled the silence. Computers left on standby. Distant conversations behind closed doors. She turned the corner and stopped outside a heavy steel door marked Evidence Storage. Authorized personnel only. Her father used to come here all the time. She remembered the smell of his gloves when he came home. That faint metallic tang that clung to his uniform after late shifts. She hesitated. Then curiosity, that small, reckless spark her father used to laugh about, pushed her forward. She turned the handle. The door creaked open. The room was colder than the hall, the air thick with the scent of old paper, gun oil, and secrets. Rows of shelves lined the walls, each stacked with boxes labeled in thick black marker. Case number 12, case number 32, case number 47. Sophie stepped closer. "Wow." Little girl followed, sniffing along the boxes. Her tail lowered. Her ears twitched. She stopped suddenly near a low shelf and froze. Sophie crouched beside her. "What is it?" The dog sniffed again, more urgently this time. Her nose pressed against one particular box. The label smudged but legible. Case 47, internal. Little girl whined softly, pawing at the box as if trying to pull it out. Sophie frowned. "That one?" The dog barked once, quietly, the kind of bark that meant she'd found something. Sophie leaned closer. The box smelled strange. Faint cologne, old leather, and something metallic beneath it. She didn't recognize it, then. She was just a kid, after all. But little girl wouldn't move from that spot. "Okay," Sophie whispered, stroking her fur. "We'll tell someone tomorrow." Before she could reach for the tag, a sound echoed from the hallway. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow. She froze. A man's shadow stretched across the floor. Sophie grabbed little girl's collar, ducking behind a shelf. The door creaked open, and a beam of light swept the room. The man stepped inside. Tall, dark suit, expensive shoes. He wasn't a cop. Sophie didn't know him, but little girl stiffened immediately, her body low and silent. The scent of his cologne filled the air, strong and familiar, the same one that clung to the box. Sophie held her breath. The man walked straight to the shelf, knelt, and opened the box. He removed a small envelope, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and left, door closing softly behind him. The silence that followed felt heavier than the dark. back to the present. Sophie's eyes flew open. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The courtroom swam back into focus. The judge, the jurors, Daniel at the desk. And there he was. Mr. Kane standing near the bench, checking his watch with the same hand that had opened that box. The scent had returned with him, the same one that hung in the evidence room that night. Her hands trembled. She could barely breathe. It was him, the man in the dark suit, the one who had taken something from her father's case file, the one whose scent her dog would never forget. Her father's voice echoed in her head, faint but steady, like wind through leaves. Trust what she smells, not what they say. Sophie blinked hard, trying to stay composed. Daniel noticed the change in her expression, the subtle way her shoulders stiffened, her gaze fixed on Kane like she was seeing a ghost. "Sophie," he whispered. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Little girl stirred beside her. The dog's nose lifted, nostrils flaring. Then, without warning, she raised her head fully, posture tall, proud, resolute. Her eyes locked on the man across the room. A hush fell again. That same electric silence that always came before truth revealed itself. Kane turned slightly, sensing eyes on him. "What?" he snapped, voice shaky beneath the performance. The dog didn't blink. Her ears pointed forward, her chest expanded. A single sound began deep in her throat. A low, rolling growl that built slowly, steadily, until it filled the courtroom like the voice of something ancient and certain. People glanced nervously, whispering. The bailiff moved forward. Daniel raised a hand to stop him. "Don't," he said quietly. "She's not attacking." The growl deepened. Sophie didn't look away. Her father's words echoed once more in her mind. She finds what's lost. Always. Now she knew what little girl had found. Not an object, but the truth itself. The scent of deceit. The ghost of her father's final night. The link between past and present. And as little girl's growl filled the courtroom, Sophie understood. This was no longer just a trial. It was her father's case reborn. The storm outside had started quietly, a drizzle tapping against the courthouse windows. But inside, the tension was a thunder all its own. Every eye in the room darted between the defense table and the motionless German shepherd sitting near the stand. Little girl hadn't taken her eyes off Mr. Kane since the break ended. Her body was still, but her focus was a blade, sharp, unwavering, ready to cut through the layers of his composure. And Daniel Briggs could feel it too, something alive humming beneath the still air. Truth waiting for its moment. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Counselor Briggs," she said, tone measured, "do you have further questions for the witness?" Daniel rose slowly, voice steady but pulse racing. "Yes, Your Honor, but I'd like to request a brief demonstration. A verification, if you will." Kane's scoff echoed across the room. "A demonstration? What is this, a training session? You're not seriously suggesting we let a dog dictate court proceedings?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I'm suggesting we let the truth speak for itself." The gallery murmured. The judge frowned, glancing between them. "Mr. Briggs, this is highly irregular." "So is perjury," Daniel said quietly. A hush fell. The judge sighed. "You have 5 minutes. No theatrics." "No theatrics, Your Honor. Just clarity." He turned toward Sophie, who sat behind the railing clutching her backpack. Their eyes met. She knew before he even spoke. Slowly, she reached into the bag and pulled out a worn, faded glove, its edges frayed, one corner darkened with age. Her father's glove. The moment she held it up, little girl's ears perked. Kane gave a dry laugh. This is absurd. We're really entertaining props now? Daniel ignored him. This belonged to Officer Miles, he said clearly. It was the last item handled by him before his final mission. It's been stored in sealed evidence until this morning. He placed the glove gently on the table in front of the dog. Little girl, he said softly. You remember this? The shepherd sniffed once, twice, then pressed her nose against it. A small whine escaped her throat, the sound of recognition, of memory. Sophie swallowed hard, holding back tears. That's Daddy's, she whispered. Daniel took a step back. Now, he said, turning to Kane, if you're so confident in your innocence, stand where you stood before. Right there. Kane hesitated. His smirk faltered. This is ridiculous. Then prove it, Daniel said evenly. You said she only reacts to emotion. Let's test that. The judge gestured impatiently. Proceed. Kane rolled his shoulders and strode forward, trying to reclaim his charm. He stopped a few feet from the dog, lifting his chin. Fine. If this will finally put this nonsense to rest. The room held its breath. Little girl lifted her head, sniffing the air, the scent traveling invisible paths no human could see. The faint trace of her master's glove, the familiar cologne, the metallic tang that linked the past to the man standing in front of her now. Then she barked, loud, sharp, unmistakable. The sound cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. People jumped. The judge's gavel slammed once, but it did nothing to quiet the noise. Little girl barked again, lower, deliberate, and then froze, eyes locked on Kane. Control your animal, Kane snapped, stepping back. This is an outrage, but no one moved. The silence that followed was deafening. The kind that doesn't ask for attention. It commands it. Daniel's voice cut through it, calm as a blade. Interesting. Out of everyone in this room, she barked only at you. Kane laughed. Too loud, too brittle. Coincidence. Dogs react to tone, to movement. Daniel took a slow step forward. Or to memory. Kane stiffened. Daniel's gaze hardened. Tell me, Mr. Kane, do you deny meeting with the accused prior to his arrest? Of course I do, he stammered, voice cracking. I represent him now, that's all. Then why? Daniel asked softly. Does a police K-9 trained in scent detection react to you as if she's found a match? Kane opened his mouth, but no words came. Sweat beaded along his temple. His hand twitched toward his pocket. The mask of confidence was slipping. Fast. Sophie watched from her seat, frozen in place. Her father's voice echoed inside her, quiet and steady. Trust what she smells, not what they say. Daniel took another step closer. So you're saying this is random? That she's mistaken? Yes, Kane said, swallowing hard. She's mistaken. And then, a sound. Small, sharp, perfectly timed. Sophie sneezed, the same sound that had silenced the courtroom days before. Kane flinched, just slightly, but enough. Little girl's reaction was instant. Her ears shot forward, her body stiffened, and a deep, guttural growl rolled from her chest. Not wild, but precise. A signal. The courtroom froze. Every eye shifted between Sophie, the dog, and the lawyer. Daniel turned slowly, realization dawning. His gaze landed on Sophie, calm, deliberate, watching the dog. He understood now. The sneeze wasn't random. It was communication. Little girl barked again, once, clear and final. Kane stumbled backward, eyes wide. This is manipulation! The girl's controlling the dog! But his voice cracked, trembling under the weight of his own fear. Daniel's expression didn't change. You're right, he said quietly. She is controlling the dog, but not with tricks, with truth. The judge frowned, clearly uncertain. Counselor Briggs, Your Honor, Daniel interrupted gently. We may not speak the same language as that animal, but she speaks one that never lies. Every officer who worked with Officer Miles knew that. And right now, he glanced at Kane. She's saying what we've all been too afraid to ask. He faced Kane directly. What were you doing near the evidence for Case 47? The lawyer's mouth opened, then closed. His voice came out barely above a whisper. I don't know what you're talking about. Sophie sneezed again. The sound echoed through the still courtroom. Sharp, deliberate, final. Little girl's growl deepened, rising like the rumble of distant thunder. Kane's hand shook visibly now. The faint scent of his cologne, that same cursed mixture, filled the air again. He looked like a man unraveling, cornered by something he couldn't rationalize away. Daniel didn't press further. He didn't have to. The truth had already been spoken, not in words but in instinct, in memory, in the sound of loyalty refusing to die. The judge, bewildered but moved, looked toward Kane. Counselor, do you wish to respond? Kane said nothing. The silence that followed was heavier than any confession. In that moment, it wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a reckoning. Between deception and devotion. Between man's arrogance and a creature's unyielding honesty. Daniel glanced toward Sophie. She met his gaze, eyes wet but steady. Between them, an unspoken understanding passed, like light through a window cracked open at last. And at the heart of it all, little girl sat tall, still as stone, staring at the man who had lied, the low rumble in her chest no longer fury, but truth itself, spoken in the only way she knew how. For a moment, no one moved. The courtroom existed in two worlds, the present filled with gasps and silence, and a past quietly awakening in the corners of Sophie's mind. The light shifted. The sound of rain against the courthouse windows blended with another rain. One long ago, falling on an open training field where her father's laughter used to live. It wasn't imagination. It was memory. Flashback. The field was slick with mud, the kind that clung to boots and paws alike. Officer Miles knelt beside a younger little girl, her fur still bright, her eyes full of fire. Again, he said, voice firm but kind. We don't chase the noise. We find the truth. He held out two identical gloves, one clean, one smeared faintly with oil and sweat. Little girl sniffed both, then barked at the second. Miles grinned. Good girl. That's the liar's hand. 12-year-old Sophie stood nearby under an umbrella, watching with fascination. How can she tell, Daddy? Miles looked at her and smiled. Because deceit smells different, sweetheart. It's not just chemicals. It's heartbeat, fear, the way the air changes when someone hides something. Sophie tilted her head. So dogs can smell lies? Miles chuckled. Maybe not lies themselves, but they can smell what lies feel like. They don't second-guess what they sense. They trust it. You should too. Little girl barked once, almost proudly. Miles tossed her a treat. See? Loyalty and truth. That's all she knows. The clouds broke slightly, spilling sunlight across the wet grass. Sophie reached out her hand, and little girl pressed her nose into it. That's why she's special, Miles said softly. Because she doesn't see good or bad the way people do. She just sees true. Back to the courtroom. The scene dissolved back into the present, light flickering across marble floors, the echo of that word true still lingering in the air like an afterimage. Mr. Kane stood frozen at the defense table, face pale. His practiced confidence had cracked. The lines around his mouth deepened, eyes darting like a man who suddenly found himself without a script. She's just reacting, he stammered, voice rising. That dog doesn't know anything. But his protest landed flat, brittle. It broke against the silence of the room, a silence already filled with understanding. Daniel Briggs rose slowly, expression unreadable. His voice came out low, almost reverent. You're right about one thing, counselor. She doesn't think the way we do. She doesn't reason. She doesn't calculate. She just knows. That's what makes her different from us. He stepped closer, eyes locked on the man who had mocked everything the K-9 unit stood for. You call it instinct. I call it truth stripped of ego. Kane's jaw clenched. He turned toward the jury, voice trembling with desperation. You're seriously taking this as evidence? It's a dog. You're letting an animal decide a man's fate. No one answered him. Even the judge didn't move. The jurors weren't looking at him anymore. Their eyes were on the shepherd, sitting calmly by the bench, her chest rising slowly, her gaze still locked on him. The truth didn't need words. It had already spoken. Sophie sat silently, her hand resting on little girl's back. The warmth of the dog's fur grounded her, but her heart still raced. For her, this wasn't just justice. It was her father's voice finally being heard again. Trust what she smells, not what they say. It echoed in her head like a whisper carried through time. And as the memory merged with the moment, the courtroom around her began to fade again, replaced by flashes of the past. Her father throwing a ball in the rain, the laughter, the flashlight beams slicing through the dark during late-night drills, the way he'd ruffle little girls' ears after every successful track. The montage flooded her mind, love and loss entwined, every image glowing, then dissolving like film burning at the edges. Back in the present, little girl shifted suddenly, pressing closer to Sophie, her head pushed into the girl's chest, firm, insistent, as if to say, I'm still here. The movement broke Sophie. Tears slipped down her cheeks, soundless and unstoppable. Kane saw it and exploded. This is a setup, he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. A stunt! You're all being manipulated by a mutt and a child. Enough. A single tear fell from Sophie's chin onto the dog's ear, and in that stillness, Daniel Briggs, the man who had sworn never to get emotional in court again, felt his own composure crack. He turned slightly away, blinking hard. But it was no use. The sting behind his eyes was sharp, undeniable. Even the toughest men couldn't stand against the kind of truth that looked back at them through a dog's eyes. No gavel struck. No verdict was read. But everyone in that room already knew what had been decided. The man who lied had been seen. The man who'd fallen had been heard. And between them, a dog, the last bridge between life and memory, had spoken the only language that mattered: loyalty. Sophie wrapped her arms around little girl, burying her face in the fur that still carried the faint scent of rain, of home, of her father. Time Salmon and Larso. Good girl, she whispered through her tears. You kept your promise. And somewhere deep within that moment, between the heartbeat of grief and the breath of peace, it felt as if another presence smiled with them, unseen but near. The verdict came down like a whisper that carried the weight of thunder. No one clapped, no one cheered. Justice didn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it came quietly, through the eyes of a German shepherd who refused to forget. Mr. Kane stood pale and hollow at the defense table, the sharpness of his suit now just an empty shell around a man stripped of his confidence. The judge's words washed over him like cold rain. Counselor Kane, in light of new evidence and your misconduct, this court recommends immediate review for disbarment. He didn't protest. He didn't dare. His voice, once dripping with arrogance, was now nothing more than breath and regret. Beside him, his client, the accused officer, sat trembling. When the evidence surfaced linking him to internal case tampering, his composure shattered. I didn't mean... It wasn't supposed to... But the words fell apart, like the lies they carried. The judge's gavel fell once, hard. Court adjourned. The echo rolled through the room, final and absolute. The crowd dispersed slowly, whispering, avoiding eye contact, humbled witnesses to something they couldn't quite explain. A story of loyalty that didn't need words, of justice delivered by a creature who'd only ever wanted to protect. Sophie remained seated, still as stone, one arm wrapped tightly around little girl's neck. The shepherd leaned into her, exhausted but calm, eyes soft. Sunlight streamed through the tall courtroom windows, catching the dust in golden swirls around them. Two souls in a pool of quiet light, untouched by the chaos outside. Across the room, Daniel Briggs gathered his files but didn't leave. He hesitated, watching them. The small girl who carried her father's courage, and the dog who carried his heart. He approached quietly, kneeling beside them. His voice was low, sincere. You and your dad, he said, just solved one more case. Sophie looked up, eyes glassy with tears. He'd be happy, she whispered. Daniel smiled gently. He is. They both turned toward the shepherd. Little girl's eyes fluttered shut for a moment, tail thumping softly on the floor, as if agreeing. Daniel brushed his hand over her fur. She's earned her rest. Sophie nodded slowly. They said she's too old now. She can't serve anymore. He met her gaze. Then let her come home, with you. That's what your father would have wanted. The words hung in the air, simple, but they filled the room like music. Sophie pressed her forehead to the dog's. I'll take care of you now, okay? No more cages. No more uniforms. Little girl exhaled, a slow, contented sigh that trembled with years of service finally allowed to end. Her eyes closed halfway, not in weakness, but in peace. Outside, the city was bathed in soft afternoon light. The courthouse steps glistened from a recent rain. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras clicked, but Daniel raised a hand, shielding Sophie as they passed. "She's not for headlines," he said firmly. "She's a hero, not a spectacle." They stepped out into the open air, and for the first time in months, Sophie smiled. Small, fragile, but real. The storm had passed. Days later, the world had shifted back to ordinary rhythm. Yet for Sophie, everything felt new. The quiet hum of the morning, the smell of coffee from the kitchen, the soft click of paws on the wooden floor. Reminders that home had changed shape, but not meaning. Little girl followed her everywhere now. She didn't move as fast as before. Her steps were slower, deliberate, but there was peace in her gait, in the way her tail wagged lazily when Sophie's laughter filled the house again. On the table, a framed photo of Officer Miles watched over them, his smile forever frozen mid-laughter. Sophie placed her father's old police badge beside it, polished and gleaming. "You can rest now too, Daddy," she whispered. "She's safe. We're both okay." Montage. Morning light spills across the park where it all began. Sophie runs through the tall grass, her laughter echoing just like it did years ago. Little girl trots beside her, ears flopping with every slow, steady stride. The leash dangles loosely from Sophie's hand. Trust needs no restraint now. They reach the old oak tree, the one her father used to stand under during training. Sophie kneels, letting little girl sniff the roots, the bark, the soil that still carries the faint memory of his footsteps. All that's left is peace. She looks down at her companion, smiling through her tears. "Let's go home, girl." They walk back through the park together, the tall grass brushing against Sophie's knees, the fading sunlight painting them in gold. Behind them, two shadows stretch long and even, one small, one four-legged, perfectly in sync. For the first time since her father's death, Sophie doesn't feel alone. And as they disappear into the distance, the camera lingers on the field, on the trails of paw prints leading back toward the trees, toward the place where loyalty had once saved the truth. The storm had passed. The air was warm again. And in that golden light, everything, for once, was exactly as it should be. The world had turned gentle again. It was spring now, the kind of soft, forgiving spring that makes even old scars seem lighter in the sunlight. The cemetery rested on a small hill overlooking the town, its rows of white stones glowing faintly under a pale sky. Birds moved through the branches above, their songs carrying on the wind. Sophie walked slowly along the path, her boots pressing into the damp grass. She was older now, taller, her hair longer, her steps surer, but her eyes carried the same quiet fire. In her hands, she held a bouquet of wildflowers, clumsy but beautiful. Beside her padded little girl, gray now around the muzzle, her gait slower but still proud. Each step felt like a heartbeat returning home. They stopped at a familiar grave, Officer Miles Thompson. The headstone was simple, just like he'd wanted. Loyal father, brave officer, loved beyond words. Sophie knelt, brushing a leaf off the engraved name. She placed the flowers gently at its base. The breeze stirred, carrying the scent of earth and lilac. "Hi, Dad," she whispered softly. "It's been a while." Little girl lay down beside her, resting her chin on the grass. Sophie smiled, running her fingers through the aging fur. She's still with me, you know. Just like you said she'd be. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver badge, her father's. The metal had dulled over the years, but the engraving still caught the light. "Daniel said to give this back to you," she murmured. "But I think you'd rather she kept it." She unclipped little girl's collar and slipped the badge onto the tag ring. It clinked softly against the metal. The sound was small, but it carried, like the echo of something eternal. For a while there was only silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty, only full of everything left unsaid. The wind changed, cooler now, brushing through the trees. Sophie laughed quietly, remembering. "You know, she still does it," she said, glancing at the shepherd. "The sneezing thing." Little girl's ear flicked as if she understood. Sophie grinned through the ache in her chest. "Yeah, every time someone lies, even in a movie." The dog gave a small huff, tail tapping weakly against the ground. Sophie tilted her head back, squinting at the sky. "It's okay, girl," she whispered. "No more lies today." Sophie buried her face into the soft fur, her sobs quiet and raw. "You kept your promise, Dad," she whispered through tears. "She did everything you asked." Her fingers found the silver badge, still warm against the collar. She pressed it to her heart. "You can rest now, both of you." A gust of wind swept through the trees above, shaking loose a flurry of petals from the blooming cherry tree nearby. They drifted down around her, pink and white, like nature itself laying down a blanket of farewell. Sophie sat there for a long time, one hand resting over the badge, the other stroking the still fur. The ache in her chest was sharp but not empty. It was full of love, full of everything she'd learned from both of them. Trust, loyalty, truth. She closed her eyes. "I'll be okay, Dad," she said softly. "You don't have to worry anymore." A single beam of sunlight broke through the clouds overhead, spilling across the grave, across Sophie's face and across the body of the dog who had once been her protector. The light shimmered through her tears, turning them into something almost golden. She smiled, not because the pain had gone, but because it finally made sense. There was no separation in loyalty, no end in love. Her father had lived through this dog, and now, through her, both would live on. Sophie leaned forward one last time, kissing the shepherd's head. Rate, slow, pitch, first. "Good girl," she whispered. "You can go home now." The wind carried her words away, soft and weightless, up toward the open sky. The camera pans upward. The clouds part just enough to reveal sunlight breaking through, wide, warm, endless. The trees sway gently, the grass rippling like an ocean of green beneath it. The headstone, the badge, the girl, all bathed in that light. A narrator's voice, quiet, almost like memory itself, drifts through the scene. Some truths aren't spoken in words. They're felt, in loyalty, in love, and in the quiet heart of a dog who never stopped believing. The light lingers for a moment longer, then fades softly into white. Only the sound of the wind remains. Then, nothing but peace. Sometimes, stories like Rex's remind us what words can't. That love doesn't always speak, it listens. German shepherds have that rare gift. Loyalty that doesn't waver, understanding that doesn't need translation, and hearts that never judge. They stand beside us in silence, yet somehow say everything we need to hear. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that quiet connection, that you and me against the world feeling, then you already know what I mean. It's more than companionship. It's family. Because at the end of it all, they don't just guard our homes, they guard our hearts, faithfully, silently, and forever.